that also, the magnetic field is weakening and fluctuating, and then and if that does a reversal, you got some of these scientists are claiming there's going to be 300-400 mile an hour winds, going all across the planet.
It's possible. The guy I think you want to talk to is Guy McPherson. He, I followed him for a long time, and I've spoken with him. He is a very interesting guy to talk to. He was a professor at Arizona State, and he does some research into climate stuff that is very interesting. It's very dire.
Yeah. Talking to him, what type of impression did you get off with him? I mean, are you thinking that it's going to be a major change in the near future in our in our lifetime?
Well, I mean, I believe for a long time that we're cruising for a bruising. One of the things that I've long looked toward is that, there are these ghost cities all over the place, right? These Chinese ghost cities.
Which I always thought was strange.
What?
And which I always thought was strange. They built all these huge cities, and this kind of like left them there for no reason. And I got a funny feeling I know why.
So it turns out that at least the ones in China, the ones in Africa, I'm not so sure. I have an overall theory about the whole thing, but at least the ones in China, if you look at the positions of them, some of the ones that are really out in the boonies, they actually, and are kind of northish, they actually come close to where the glacial line was in Mongolia. So they're just below the glacial line. And if you look at some of the other ones, they're positioned where, if there's sea level rise, where you'd have basically beachfront property. But the ones in Africa, I think there are a few in like Nigeria or somewhere, but they're the most interesting to me of all, because I think it really portends a very dystopian future. One of the I don't know if you've gone over this a lot on your show or not, but one of the there's always been this underlying theme within the conspiracy realm of depopulation. And everybody's like, Agenda 21 this, Agenda 21 that, depopulation. And if you actually look at population growth, pretty much everybody is negative. The entire world is pretty much negative, except for Africa. In Africa, it's massive increase. And a lot of people have said, well, the UN has these programs and they're going to kill all these people and whatever. And it's like, there's 6 billion people, 6.2 billion people. And the theory is, the Georgia Guidestone thing, the theory is they want to reduce it to 500 million. And it's like, there isn't enough space on the earth to burn the bodies of 6.1 billion people, right? But I think what you're seeing is that there's a larger program across the entire world, which is declining the overall population and shrinking it down to whatever they want it to be. And then I think that long term, what's going to happen is that these ghost cities in the African continent, I think, are being built to house these massive increases in population. And I think that eventually the entire continent will become a factory. It'll be the world's factory.
That's what has me concerned.
Because, if you look at it, right, Africa is a very unique continent in that it has everything that it needs. It has oil, it has diamonds, it has all kinds of metals. It borders the Atlantic Ocean, it borders the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean. So it can transport to Europe easily. Stuff can be transported to Asia, to North America, and everywhere in between. It's kind of a well-positioned place for transportation. It's huge. It has a lot of sunlight, so, good for solar power. It has oil. So if they want to use oil products, there's oil there. Like I said, diamonds and titanium and all kinds of stuff. So gold, silver. So, it would make sense. And I think it's sad, but I think ultimately that because the population is increasing there, I suspect that over the long term that all manufacturing will eventually be pushed to there, and it'll be a huge factory. Like hive cities and all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's face it. I mean, look at first, cheap manufacturing was in Japan. And then it went from Japan, it went to Taiwan. And then from Taiwan, it went to Korea. And then China. Right. And now, I hate to say it, the African nations will probably be the next place where they can get slave labor, pretty much, where they could work for.
Yeah, it really comes down to where can you get cheap slave labor. If you could get cheap slave labor and for a while there were places in Central America like Nicaragua and Honduras and Guatemala where they were getting cheap slave labor. Then there were places in Eastern Europe, the Ukraine and some of those places where they could get cheap labor, and they just kind of roll it around. But I think eventually it'll end up there. Because I think it's got most everything you need. And it has a large population. It has lots and lots of land.
Oh yeah. Well, I think they do.
Sad.
They do want to thin out the population, and it's a fact.
Oh yeah, they are.
And then you sit there and all these. Again, I have a regular guest on my show who comes on about once a month. He was with the DOD for about 10 years, and he has told me such horror stories that I couldn't sleep after, talking to him on a couple of shows. I mean, some of the stuff he said, it really scared the shit out of me. I can say that word shit because we're not on FM radio. Okay. Not for another 2 weeks. We're going to be, in 2 weeks, I know one radio station at least is going to be carrying us, and I can't use the word shit after that. But I can, but then
no shit after that.
Yeah, no shit after that. Otherwise, I get a letter from the FCC and it's a fine. But what really concerns me is, years ago, they built all these empty FEMA camps. And and he said that, they're going to come in handy shortly. And I got a funny feeling he could be right. I mean, I think things are going to happen, and it's going to happen very, very fast when it does happen. But I didn't even realize, honestly, about you think you have your phone turned off and you're talking to your wife. And if you're on a list of being listened to, I mean, they can listen to you on your phone. It's turned off, your smart TVs and all that stuff. He was telling me a little story that he was going to go buy. I think it was like on a Friday night. He was talking to his wife in the living room. His cell phone wasn't even nearby, but they had the TV going. He was talking to his wife. He wanted to buy a beach bike, and it was a certain weird brand, a custom bike. The next morning, and he said he did not research it on the internet or nothing, but the next morning he got in the car. They were going to go some places to find the bike where he could buy it, right? Guess what started popping up on his frickin' phone?
Yeah, I believe it. It's called big data.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a worse one. And this was actually eventually generated like a lawsuit. There was a guy in, I believe, Minnesota, which is weird because that's where they're from. And he got a letter from Target. And in the letter from Target, it had a whole bunch of coupons and other stuff. And the letter was like, "Hey, we just wanted to let you know we're excited you're going to have a kid." And he's like, "Wait a minute, I'm like 60 years old. I'm not having children. My wife and I have had kids. They're grown now. What do you mean?" And he called them up and he's all, "What do you mean I'm going to have a kid?" And they're like, "Well, according to your buying patterns," because they had a, red card, right? And they track it. And even if you use a credit card, they track it. And so he was like, "What do you people are insane." And they're like, "No, according to your buying habits, you are buying things that are consistent with somebody in your household being pregnant." And he was like, "Well, my wife is not pregnant and we're not having a child." And then he was like, "Oh my God, my adult daughter lives with me."
Uh-oh.
And so he went to her and said, and she was an adult. And he said, "Hey, are you pregnant?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, I'm pregnant, but I didn't want to tell anybody yet." and he was like, "Oh my God." And Target figured it out because of the things that she was buying on the red card, because 10% off, right, 5% or whatever, you get, it built up a pattern, and that pattern was consistent. So when they went and put it through their big data clusters, they got it back that, oh, this person has these buying habits. We should send them discount coupons for diapers and wipes and things that you need for a baby. So they're always mining data. Everything you do, if you have like a little card from your local grocery store, when you use it, and we all do it, when you use it, they're logging it, and they're making patterns for you. And everybody does it.
Yeah.
It's not confined, and it's totally legal, and it's not confined to one corporation or another. It's every corporation.
Well, I totally believe that. Buying stuff for the studio, for example, the past year I've been upgrading the studio and buying equipment. Now, I don't go research it on the internet, for say. A lot of the stuff, I go to one or two places and I order the stuff. And, I check it out on their prices. But all of a sudden, let's say I'm looking for, a compressor or some weird thing, right? A certain brand. The next day on my phone, it's popping up all these different companies having it.
Yeah. Because either the pattern that you're showing by the equipment you're purchasing, or however they're getting it, they're creating a pattern, and that pattern says, oh, well, this guy, he's buying this kind of, radio equipment. It's a problem.
Well,
it's inescapable.
What I was told, like Google, for example, you're using the internet, right? You're sending an email out. You're on a secured, right, website. So you think it's secure. And you're ordering stuff, right? Well, you know what? Google has that information. They know exactly where you've been, what you're ordering, right? And then all of a sudden they share that information with everybody else that has that type of equipment that you might be interested in.
They scan your email. If you use Gmail, they're scanning your email. And yeah, there are a lot of websites, because Google, everything's free, right? And so if this is the thing that a lot of people don't think about. Everything's free. Well, no, it's not free. Nothing is free, but the way they're giving it to you for free is that they're mining your data. They're taking all the data. They go out to these websites and they say, okay, you want to know who's visiting your website, right? So put this little code in the header, and every time the page loads, it'll call back to us, and we'll log it, and then you can see who's been visiting, where they're coming from, whatever. Well, they mine it. They take that data, and then they figure they can start to build patterns of somebody from this IP address to this IP range. And an IP address is kind of like a street address for your internet connection.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people have like home gateways or whatever. Well, that gateway has an IP address, and that IP address is trackable. And so they log it. Every website you go to pretty much logs that data. That if you come in and hit the website, the minute you load the page, they are recording on the web server all the assets that you're pulling. So they know what page you went to, and to make matters worse, there's actually an old story, and this is very old now, but it was in Wired magazine, which is kind of a nerdy, kind of techie magazine. And there was this network engineer at AT&T at an AT&T POP point of presence in San Francisco, and it was a major exchange point for AT&T, where their network was connecting to a bunch of other networks. And so he went out to do maintenance, and he was out there messing around with a switch, what servers connect to, and all that. And he was out there in the data center, and he was working on the switch, and he saw this it was a red cable, I think. He saw this red cable, and and it was just plugged into this random port on the end of the switches, or the ports, the little plugs, they're numerical. So, you might have a 48 port switch. Well, there's port 1 through 48, and 48 is on the far right side, and 1 is on the, there are 2 banks of them, and 1 to 24 is on the top, and then 24 to 48. 48 is on the far right side. Well, he saw this cable plugged into port 48. And when you do work like that, when you're dealing with very large networks, you have very accurate maps of what is plugged into what, right? So that you can very quickly fix problems. And so he pulled up